At my dad's birthday, my name tag said the disappointment, so I made a toast and walked out of their lives for good. So, there I was, watching my dad practically choke when the real surprise hit me as I stepped out the door, leaving behind one last moment. I'm a 32-year-old woman, and if you asked my dad, he'd probably say I'm his biggest letdown. It's not because I'm a troublemaker or unemployed, or because I've done anything terrible. It's simply because I decided to live my life my way and not follow the path he laid out for me. My dad, James, is one of those guys who likes things just so. He's all about being in control, keeping up appearances, and pushing for family loyalty, as long as it suits him. When my parents split, I was only 10. It wasn't a nasty breakup, at least not on the surface, but my dad moved on super fast. Within a year, he was hitched to Stephanie, who had 2 kids from another marriage, Hunter and Olivia. That's when the changes began. I really tried at first because I was just a kid and wanted my dad to be happy. Stephanie seemed nice but in a sugary sweet, not so genuine kind of way. She was always over the top in public, acting like she was eager to blend our families. She'd give me these tight hugs and say things like, "I just know we're going to be best friends." But behind closed doors, it was obvious she only cared about her own kids. My dad, who used to be really involved in my life, suddenly had new priorities. He went from being my dad to being their dad. It started with small things, like missing my soccer games but never missing Hunter's, forgetting to pick me up from school but always being on time for Olivia's dance recital. Then, by the time I was 14, it got worse. I was supposed to babysit them, help with chores they didn't have to do, and pretend to be the perfect big sister while they got away with everything. If I ever said something, my dad would let out this weary sigh like I was exhausting him, saying, "They need more attention. You're older, be mature." Meanwhile, Stephanie was more direct, she'd just call me selfish. The final nail in the coffin came when my dad drained the savings account my mom had set up for my college tuition. My mom fought tooth and nail in court to get that money back, but by then, the damage was already done. I was livid, and barely talked to him during my last year of high school. When I left for college, which I paid for myself, I only came back for the occasional holiday. Years went by, and our relationship never fully healed. I'd still get invites to family events, but they always felt more like obligations than genuine attempts to see me. To my dad and Stephanie, I was just the troublesome child who wouldn't join in the happy family facade. Meanwhile, Hunter and Olivia were their little stars. Fast forward to my dad's birthday bash. Stephanie was throwing this massive, over-the-top party, inviting everyone they'd ever met. I wasn't planning on showing up, but my aunt, one of the few who still had my back, convinced me to swing by, saying, "Just drop in for a bit. Maybe things have changed." Spoiler alert, they hadn't. The second I walked in, that familiar, unwelcoming vibe hit me. People I hadn't seen in years were there, but instead of warm hellos, I got polite nods. Conversations happened all around me, but no one really included me. I spotted my dad laughing it up across the room with some old pals, but when he saw me, his smile faltered for a split second, like he was surprised I actually came. I was already second-guessing my decision to come when I noticed a small table by the entrance with name tags. This was Stephanie's thing at past events, supposedly to help people mingle. Most of them were normal: Uncle Mark, Cousin Rachel, Neighbor Tom. Then I saw mine, and I just froze. My tag didn't just have my name, there was something else. My stomach turned as I read it. I picked it up, staring at the words, and from across the room, I heard an all-too-familiar laugh. Stephanie. She was watching me, wine glass in hand, with a smug little smirk on her face. I clenched the name tag in my fingers, feeling heat rise in my chest. This was definitely not going down the way she thought it would. I stood there a moment, gripping the tag, trying to wrap my head around it. It had my name, but below, in smaller print, someone had added the disappointment. At first, I thought it was some sick joke, maybe a cousin trying to be funny or just a bad mix-up. But then I saw her across the room, standing by the bar, sipping her wine like she hadn't a care in the world. Our eyes met, and that slow, satisfied smirk spread across her face. I could feel my heart racing, thumping in my ears. A few folks had spotted me standing there, shooting quick looks my way. No one said a word, but I could sense it, the pressure, the expectations. It was like I could almost hear them thinking, "Don't cause a scene." So, I took a deep breath and put the name tag back on the table, lining it up with the others. I nearly laughed, classic Stephanie move. Not a big, obvious insult, nothing that would make people call her out, just sneaky enough that if I reacted, I'd look like the drama queen. Walking through the door, I should have known she'd pull something like this. Then, my aunt, the only family member who really got me, touched my shoulder. She'd seen the name tag, and her eyes flicked toward Stephanie. "You okay?" she asked softly. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But I wasn't. I was drained, like I'd felt a million times before. This wasn't anything new or even the worst she'd done, just another reminder of where I supposedly stood. I should have just walked away right then, but instead, I decided this time was different. I took a deep breath, pulled myself together, and smiled, a real, genuine smile. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a server, tapped it with my nail, and turned to the room. If Stephanie wanted a show, I was going to give her one. I lifted my glass slightly, and the room's vibe shifted. People glanced my way, and Stephanie hesitated for just a moment before sipping her wine, trying to figure me out. I stretched the moment a little longer than needed, like I might make a toast, then shook my head and moved further into the party. I wasn't giving her the satisfaction of a reaction, not yet. The party was exactly what I expected, crowded, super fancy, with top-notch food and decor. Stephanie always made things a show, turning my dad's birthday into her own little spectacle. It wasn't really about celebrating him, it was about flaunting her perfect life, how much everyone adored her and my dad, and how successful their kids were, except me, of course. Hunter and Olivia were already in the spotlight, surrounded by relatives. Olivia was bragging about her wedding, with my dad footing the bill. "We wanted something tasteful, you know, not a tacky Pinterest affair," she beamed, flaunting her huge ring. Typical Olivia, always polished, just self-centered enough to make everything revolve around her. Hunter, meanwhile, was at the bar, nodding as my dad's old friends praised his new job, which I was sure he didn't actually earn. Everything he had was handed to him, every mistake quietly fixed by my father. I almost joined them just to shake things up, but then I heard my dad's voice. Turning, I saw him coming toward me, drink in hand, wearing his usual neutral expression. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. I gave a smile that didn't reach my eyes, wouldn't miss it. He looked around the room, then back at me. "Heard you've been busy." There it was, his typical way of not really asking about my life. I nodded. "Yeah, work's been good. Bought a house last year." His eyebrow raised slightly. "A house?" "Yep," I replied, watching him take a sip of his drink, not asking more. That's the thing about my dad, he hated it when I did anything that didn't fit his story of me being the family failure. Every little success of mine chipped away at his narrative. So, there was this time when I was all mixed up, totally selfish and kind of immature. He wasn't a fan of that side of me. Honestly, he liked the version of me he could just shake his head at, the one he could talk about with a hint of pity when folks asked about me. You know the type. I could sense him fishing for something to say, a little jab maybe. But before he could make his move, Stephanie jumped into the convo like she was cutting through butter, sharp. "Well," she said, sliding up beside him with this big, toothy grin, "at least she finally did something responsible." And just like that, I felt the heat rising in my chest again. I turned to her, and she looked like she was genuinely thrilled to see me, but I knew that look too well. Stephanie was one of those people who could slap you with an insult right to your face and then act like you were the one with the problem if you got upset. "Oh, just kidding," she'd say, "you're too sensitive." I should have just walked away, brushed it off, but I didn't. Something about this whole night was just off. Maybe it was that awkward name tag, or the way my dad barely spoke to me before finding a reason to brush me off again. Or maybe it was just the whole room full of people who never really felt like family to me. Whatever the case, I was over it. I turned to Stephanie, tilted my head a bit, and said, "You know, I was gonna just let it slide, but I have to know, whose idea was the name tag?" I caught a flicker of something on her face for a split second. "Oh, come on," she chuckled, brushing it off. "You always take things so personally." "It was just a joke." I nodded, playing along. "Right, hilarious," I replied. She just shrugged, sipping her wine. "You know, if you weren't so angry all the time, maybe you'd be," I raised a finger to cut her off and, keeping my voice calm, said, "Actually, you're right." Her eyes narrowed, curious. "About what?" she asked. "About making a joke," I said, shifting slightly and raising my glass. "Because now that I think about it, I've got a joke too." She blinked, caught off guard. My dad was getting a little squirmy next to her. Then, I gave a slow, easy smile. "I'd like to make a toast," I announced. The room started to quiet down, not all at once but gradually, as people turned to look at me, curious. Everyone loves a good toast, especially an unexpected one. I could feel my dad tensing up beside me. Stephanie let out a small laugh, trying to play it cool, like she was brushing me off. "Oh, come on, you don't have to," she said. But I held up my hand, still smiling. "No, really, I insist." The vibe in the room shifted as more people turned towards me, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Some even grabbed their drinks, ready to join in on what they thought was just a lighthearted toast. They really didn't know what was about to hit them. Stephanie's smile had tightened a bit, but she was still trying to keep her cool, sticking to her belief that I was the same old pushover she always knew, the one who swallowed every insult and never fought back. My dad, though, he wasn't looking so composed. He knew me better than she did. His grip on his glass tightened, and for the first time that night, he actually looked at me, not through me or around me, but at me. I let the silence linger a moment longer, building the anticipation, then finally raised my glass to my dad and Stephanie. "To my dad," I began, my voice light and almost chatty, "and to Stephanie, of course, because without them, I don't think I would have learned one of the most valuable lessons of my life." I paused, taking a slow sip of my champagne. Stephanie let out a small, nervous laugh. "Oh boy, here we go," she said, and a few people chuckled, thinking this was all in good fun, expecting me to make fun of myself like I always did to smooth things over. I grinned. "No, really, I mean it," I continued, "because I think we often learn the most from the people who challenge us, don't you?" I turned to my dad. "Dad, you always said that family is supposed to build each other up, that we should support one another and celebrate each other's successes." His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his grip tightening further on his drink. He didn't like where this was going. "And I used to believe that," I continued, "I really did. But then, somewhere along the way, I realized something." The room was almost completely silent now. Stephanie's fingers were curled so tightly around the stem of her wineglass, I half wondered if it might snap. I set my glass down gently on the table beside me. I realized that for some people, support only exists when you fit into the version of yourself they want you to be. As long as you play the role they've written for you, whether it's the golden child or the black sheep, they'll keep you right where they need you. But if you step outside that role, I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. So, there I was, standing in front of everyone, feeling like I was finally getting a real glimpse of how people truly saw me. The room was full of awkward shuffles and sideways glances. Olivia, for instance, was all eyes on my dad, waiting for his cue before deciding how she should react. Hunter was just there for the show, grinning like it was some sort of entertainment, and then there was Stephanie, still smiling, but her knuckles were practically white from gripping whatever was in her hands. I used to think that working hard and being successful, following all the rules, would change how they saw me. My voice got a little softer, but I wasn't backing down. I realized it didn't really matter what I did or didn't do, it was never about me. Stephanie looked like she wanted to interrupt, but I wasn't about to let that happen. I turned my focus back to my dad. Was I ever really supposed to succeed? His expression wavered just slightly, and I let that sink in. I took a deep breath, shrugged my shoulders, and kept going. I had built something of my own, a life that didn't revolve around him or this family drama, and it's been the best decision I ever made. People around me looked puzzled, like they had no clue what I was getting at, and I was over them believing the version of me that Stephanie and my dad had carefully crafted over the years. Stephanie tried to regain her grip on the situation with a forced laugh. "Oh come on, it's just a name tag." But I shook my head. "You're right, it is. But it's also a pattern, a lifetime of little jabs and jokes reminding me I'd always be the family disappointment." My dad finally stepped forward, clearing his throat, saying, "That's enough." I locked eyes with him. "Oh, I totally agree. It is enough." Before anyone could really process, I picked up my glass and raised it slightly, letting the weight of my words settle. "To the last time you'll ever see me." The room went silent. My dad stiffened, Stephanie's jaw dropped open before she snapped it shut, and someone muttered, "Wait, what?" I set down my glass, turned on my heel, and walked out, feeling their eyes and the panic that this time was different. I took one final look back before stepping outside, feeling for the first time that I wasn't fleeing a fight but heading towards freedom and peace, away from the endless family drama. The night air was refreshing, filling my lungs as the realization hit me that I'd finally cut the ties I should have severed long ago. No more pretending. No more seeking approval from people who only cared if I fit their ideal image. Driving home in silence, I felt a sense of relief wash over me with each passing mile, though part of me wondered if I'd gone too far. Had I done the right thing? Over the next few days, my phone blew up with texts and calls, but I ignored them, avoiding social media and the fallout of walking out on my dad's birthday, and publicly embarrassing him and Stephanie, my stepmother, all in one go. The family group chat was buzzing, but I stayed quiet, not ready to deal with the aftermath. Finally, my aunt, the only one who seemed to understand me, texted me, asking if I was okay. I didn't know what to say. I was okay, better than I'd been in years, but still uncertain. I told her I needed time, and she didn't push. The next morning, my dad called. "Where are you?" he asked in that familiar disappointed tone. "I'm at home," I replied, "and I'm not coming back." His silence told me everything. "You can't just leave us like this," he finally said. "We're family, we have to stick together." I didn't hesitate, not if it means pretending to be someone I'm not. That was the last conversation we had. Weeks passed, and I kept my distance from family events, weddings, birthdays, whatever. Most of them sided with my dad and Stephanie, but for the first time, I felt like I was living my truth. So, basically, people either changed their opinion of me or acted like nothing happened. I heard through the grapevine that my dad was upset, Stephanie was super angry, and my brother and sister were really disappointed in me for causing a scene. But honestly, none of that fazed me. I knew I had to do what was right for me. I was still doing my thing, living my best life, and even though it wasn't great having to cut ties with them, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't felt in forever. I haven't talked to anyone in my family since then. So, here I am, wondering if I was a jerk for walking out like that, for making my little speech and then just cutting them off for good. Did I go too far, or was it about time I stood up for myself? I've realized I'll never get my dad's approval or be the daughter he wanted. But maybe, just maybe, I've finally figured out that I don't need to be. What do you guys think? Was I totally out of line, or was this confrontation long overdue? If you like this story and want to hear more, make sure to like and subscribe. Oh, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Did I take it too far, or was the fallout completely justified?